Thank you for joining us for today's digital discussion, Gulf Coast Renewable Policy. Part of our Road to New Orleans series leading up to SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week this September 20th to the 23rd in New Orleans. Here you can find upcoming digital discussions, smart energy market Thank you for joining us for today's digital discussion, Gulf Coast Renewable Policy. Part of our Road to New Orleans series leading up to SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week this September 20th to the 23rd in New Orleans. Here you can find upcoming digital discussions, smart energy market tours, which are our traveling outdoor exhibitions, book and movie club discussions, as well as fun New Orleans themed activities you can do at home. Today's participants can use the special discount code on the screen to save on a full conference pass for SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week in September. Visit smartenergyweek.com to register today. And now, let's welcome today's presenter, Stephen Wright, Executive Director of the Gulf States Renewable Energy Industries Association.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you for joining this Gulf Coast policy preview for upcoming SPI. My name is Stephen Wright. I'm the Executive Director of Gulf States Renewable Energy Industry Association. We are a trade association under the umbrella of SEIA. We represent Louisiana and Mississippi, and we also do some work in Alabama and Arkansas. With the upcoming SPI being in New Orleans, we thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to discuss a little of the background of what has been going on in the Gulf Coast region and what we expect to happen here in the future. First, I'd like to give you a little background on the Louisiana and Mississippi markets. First off, Louisiana was one of the states that had a boom in regards to rooftop solar about 10 years ago. We had a very generous solar tax credit that, when combined with the federal tax credit, created a lot of growth in the industry. During that time, that is when the trade association came about and flourished and worked very heavily with our legislature on continuing to incentivize rooftop solar. As many states did during that time, Louisiana started to have some significant budget shortfalls. When that occurred, the solar tax credit was rolled off the books along with many others. When that happened, obviously there was some dramatic contrasting in regards to the industry. We saw Louisiana go from having probably anywhere between 80 and 100 active companies to having less than 20 active companies in the rooftop market. This, along with the fact that about that time, we started the process of looking at Louisiana's net metering policy again with a new docket. That docket moved forward for over a year, and then subsequently Louisiana took the short-sighted approach of moving from a retail net metering all the way down to an avoided cost equation. Those two things were heavily impactful on the rooftop solar market. It has been pushing back and growing again, especially with everything that we've seen in regards to energy efficiency pushes from the federal level, and a lot of the conversations that we've been seeing locally with local governments providing their own incentives. We are experiencing growth on that side as well. Mississippi, on the rooftop solar and DG side, also saw a similar kind of boom bust in the market. They also had a generous net metering policy. There was a decent amount of growth in that market originally. That changed when, again, that metering policy was adjusted in Mississippi. It went down to an avoided plus an adder, but also had a low income incentive. But that low income incentive fell woefully short and has so far been very underutilized as a component of their net metering policy. They are currently looking at a docket that is open in order to revisit net metering. The Mississippi Public Service Commission realizes that their current policy is not stimulating to rooftop solar, which is something they do want to see flourish in the state. And so that right now, all the different stakeholders are looking at possibilities on how to restructure that in a way that not only creates a competitive playing field in the state, but that also creates a functioning low-income tool. So we're excited to see what's going to happen with that. On the utility scale side, there's two very different dynamics, and that policy and how that policy has evolved is much more recent. In the Louisiana market, we currently have 18 projects in development. Only one of those is currently live. So the developments here are still extremely recent. Those developments are spread out all over the state. We've seen a series of investors. This has been something that's really grown in the last 2 years. We're currently at about $1.6 billion in investment in Louisiana. There's obviously been some impediments as far as what every state is seeing, long-term transmission infrastructure. We work very closely with MISO to try to improve that long-term planning and structural build out along with our utilities here in Louisiana. This last legislative session was the first time that utility scale solar really came on the legislative policymaker map. What we saw were some concerns on new planned developments in regards to siting. When I say siting concerns, there was really a couple of dynamics at play. One, for example, Louisiana is a very strong agricultural industry, especially around sugarcane, and some of the sites that have been selected are on existing sugarcane land. And so there was a lot of concern from the tenant farmers and the sugarcane industry that solar development would be taking cultivatable land out of their market, and that these projects, when they had run their course, would leave the land unfarmable in the future. Since then, we've seen legislation on 2 points. We had one piece of legislation by Senator Brett Alon that addressed siting rules and gave that authority to the Department of Natural Resources. That rulemaking authority is currently being used to do a public input process. Hearings are, of course, going on. There's really a few aspects that we're discussing within that group. The first of which, and in my opinion, the one that seems to be of the most concern, is decommissioning bonds. This is something a lot of states have already dealt with. There's a lot of best practices on this, but the Gulf South region is really just digging in on this. And I think it's something that we're going to see put in statute across our region. Folks want to know that these decommissioning bonds function in multiple ways. They want to know that the landowner is protected. They want to know that if there's any periodic emergencies, as the Gulf South is obviously often exposed to hurricanes and other weather events, that these bonds will be able to cover those types of significant issues. And they also want to make sure that if there was to be any long-term impact on the land, that the bond would be able to cover that. As we all know, there is no long-term impact on the land. We've seen a lot of decommissioning best practices on what those bonds look like, dispelling a lot of myths. There's a lot of neighbors are concerned around these developments about radiation potential from solar panels. We've got a lot of concerns about various chemicals such as mercury that is not in solar panels leaking into the ground. There's a lot of concern about herbicides being used to control the foliage underneath panels. We've got a myriad of myths that we've been working to dispel. It's something that we've been working very closely with with stakeholders on, with the communities on, as this has been kind of an active campaign that we have seen to confuse local residents about the impact of solar development. With that said, we've continued to move on other important rules that we think helps make good stewards of property in the community. Those include proper setbacks for solar developments. That includes adequate vegetated barriers. A lot of folks who are used to seeing farmland as they drive down the road are a bit taken back when they see these large-scale solar projects. So one thing we're doing is trying to put in best practices on how to maintain that silhouette of the landscape as we do these developments. Maintenance is another major component that we're working on. And what we want to do is we're trying to make sure that native plants are used whenever possible to continue to cultivate pollinators in the area. And we also want to make sure that there's rulemaking that eliminates any possibility of any dangerous herbicides being used. Those are really the main aspects of what we're seeing on land siting right now. With that said, there's still a great deal of pushback that we're seeing from fossil fuel, from some of the tenant farmer groups, just in general trying to shut these projects down, make sure that they do not receive tax incentives. So there's still a lot of education to do in that market. Mississippi, we have seen kind of a contrasting view. Mississippi over the last 2 years is almost at $2 billion in developing projects, with much more of them already deep in the works and live, and we expect more to come. We have not seen as much of the local pushback yet. There is some talks in some counties of some concerns and moratoriums, but for the most part, so far, Mississippi has seen, in regards to local governments, have embraced the developments a good bit more. Part of that may be that there's not as many generous tax incentives in play at Mississippi, which can cause a bit of industry-to-industry friction in some of those communities. Those two aspects of utility-scale solar have really been what has monopolized the policymaking in Louisiana and Mississippi for the last 2 years. What we're expecting now is to move into some of the policy areas that other states, especially southern states like Arkansas, have been very successful in, but Louisiana and Mississippi have not really had an opportunity to properly explore yet. Right now, Louisiana has a green tariff docket. That docket initially was just going to explore specifically green tariff policy. After the Louisiana Commission had some time to look at it and hear from stakeholders, they've decided to open that docket more broadly. We're hoping that they will look at at broader incentives and broader regulatory red tape that may be able to grow some of the things that we're doing in Louisiana. One thing in the market that we're looking to have adjusted is currently, if you are doing a non-utility scale project, you have a 300 kW cap. For that, that hinders a lot of the projects that we would like to do. There's a lot of exciting things going on in Arkansas, for example, around schools. When you can get up to the 500 kW or above mark, they're creating a lot of savings for K through 12 schools that we would like to start doing here. They're even rolling them into things like school pay raises for teachers. Another aspect that we would like to adjust in Louisiana and Mississippi in the upcoming market will be that of third-party power purchase agreements. Both states are relatively silent on what is allowed and what hasn't been allowed, and therefore we haven't seen any attempts at third-party power purchase agreements. There's several different aspects to that. One, we would like to see the nonprofit and the K through 12 market have access to those. We have Amazon and Facebook in some of those markets that would, along with other industries that have carbon zero reduction standards coming out, that they want to have access to be able to do third-party power purchase agreements. Virtual power purchase agreements would also be ideal. So Louisiana and Mississippi, we are urging both states to support those policies, and we're trying to educate our policymakers on those. We also are looking at meter aggregation right now with the Public Service Commissions, what we can do with that, how we can make it more nimble policy across both state markets. There's a couple things that I will point out for those involved in this call who are interested in the structure of the Public Service Commissions of both of those states. One, Louisiana is a very unique Public Service Commission. It has a constitutionally based plenary authority. While this is constantly being discussed as to how broad that authority sits, it does mean that in Louisiana, the PSC has a very broad jurisdiction. And so often things that you see done legislatively in other states need to move through the docket process for the Public Service Commission here. That is a 5-member commission elected on rotation. Mississippi, on the other hand, is what you would see in typically a balanced framework in the other states. Some of their policies done in the legislature, some of it falls under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission. Their Public Service Commission really only touches the IOUs, whereas Louisiana does have some authority and interaction with its co-ops. The Mississippi PSC has a 3-member commission that is rotating on election as well. We work very closely with both of them, but there's also some unique things to add to these markets. For example, Entergy New Orleans falls directly under the authority of New Orleans. They have their own utility commission underneath the city council, and they are not subject to the Public Service Commission. That has been a different dynamic that we've seen at the state level. New Orleans has passed a renewable portfolio standard within the last year. They have passed a community solar standard, and we're expecting more to come from them. There is a very aggressive push amongst the current council members and what we expect to be the next slate of council members to really embrace renewable resources and storage in the city of New Orleans and the surrounding area. One thing that we would like to embrace going forward, as well as Louisiana and Mississippi have always been oil and gas legacy states with a great deal of industry involved in both. We're really embracing recruiting right now in regards to retooling some of those refineries and facilities that are no longer in operation. One way we're seeing that is in refineries that are being retooled for hydrogen fuel. And then in order to make that process sustainable, we are looking at again, third-party power purchase agreements to be able to set up solar developments and offshore wind developments potentially in order to really embrace that opportunity and take our existing infrastructure and add that to our economy. The other aspect that we're seeing in that market is, of course, with the recent announcements of offshore wind opportunities that we are seeing. And we at Louisiana and Mississippi both have industry partners who are involved not only in construction but in actual development of these projects. That said, there's a lot of discussion around it. Both states have climate change task forces that Louisiana has a climate change task force. The Mississippi PSC is embracing a different form of study, and they're both looking at how the best way is going to be to implement and interact with offshore wind development that's approaching. Mississippi does have one large onshore wind development that's currently under construction that they passed during the last legislative session. Finally, the one other aspect that Louisiana and Mississippi is embracing is actually Gulf States Renewable Energy Industry Association is adding electrification to its umbrella during this event in September in SPI. What that means is Louisiana and Mississippi has seen a great deal of policy movement in the last couple of years around electric vehicles, around charging, around electrification infrastructure. We've really seen a gap in our voices being heard from the renewable industry and from EVs and charging in general in those states. So our goal is to broaden our association to be able to take on those policy issues as they appear in both states. We want to also recruit those industries to the states, and we want to use our voices. And we want to use our voices at the public service commissions, where right now both Louisiana and Mississippi are exploring their participation in MISO. What is the best way for that to function? What is the vision for the future with long-term infrastructure planning, and how that will impact electrification in every way. I hope that everyone here found this informative. I hope that you all reach out if I can ever be of assistance in Louisiana or Mississippi. We look forward to seeing you all at the reception and at our Gulf States Renewable panels on the 23rd. We will be hosting a 5-commissioner panel from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. We will be hosting an economic development panel from our region. And then we will also be talking to legislators from Louisiana and Mississippi to see their ideas on economic development and the renewable industry moving forward here in the Gulf region. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you for joining us today. Remember, today's participants can use the special discount code on the screen to save on a full conference registration for SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week this September. Visit smartenergyweek.com to get registered today.